What if I told you that ancient China had weddings with the dead? People wore perfume made of urine, and the dead were buried in cliffs hundreds of feet above ground. This isn't fiction. These were real customs practiced for centuries. From twisted beauty standards that crippled women for life to punishments so brutal they made even warriors tremble. This journey into ancient China will shock you, fascinate you, and leave you questioning what we think of as civilized. These aren't your usual history class facts. These are the strange, the dark, and the downright unbelievable truths from a world long gone. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear, you won't forget. Foot binding, the lotus feet. Phenomenon. Imagine being just 5 years old and having your toes bent until they break. Then they're folded under your foot and tightly wrapped in cloth so they stay that way. Forever. That's what happened to countless girls in ancient China, all in the name of beauty. Foot binding began over 1,000 years ago during the Song dynasty. The goal was to make feet as small as possible, ideally just 3 inches long. They were called lotus feet, and they were considered incredibly attractive. A woman with bound feet was seen as refined, obedient, and worthy of marriage, especially to someone rich or noble. But the process was brutal. It caused permanent damage, infections, and intense pain that lasted a lifetime. Women could barely walk, let alone run or work. Yet society celebrated this as elegance and grace. Why did this continue for centuries? Because families believed it gave daughters a better chance at marrying well. Bound feet became a status symbol. Even as some rebelled against it, the tradition was hard to kill. It wasn't until the early 20th century that foot binding was officially banned. But the scars, both physical and cultural, remained. It's one of history's clearest examples of how beauty standards can cross the line into cruelty. And it was just the beginning of the strange customs people followed. Ghost marriages, tying the living and the dead. In ancient China, a wedding didn't always need 2 living people. Sometimes the bride or groom was already dead. Ghost marriages were real, deeply rooted in the belief that the afterlife mirrored our world. If someone died unmarried, families feared their spirit would become restless. So they arranged marriages between the dead, or between the living and the dead, to give those souls peace. The rituals were chilling. Families used effigies, paper money, and even real coffins during the ceremonies. In some cases, a living person would marry a deceased stranger just to fulfill tradition. They'd live the rest of their life honoring a ghost spouse they never met. These weren't rare one-offs. Ghost marriages spanned centuries, especially in rural areas, and still happen in secret today. Sometimes families dug up bodies or swapped remains just to complete a match. And yes, dowries were still exchanged. It's a practice that forces us to ask, how far will we go for tradition? In a society where honoring ancestors meant everything, even death wasn't the end of marriage. And as odd as that sounds, the next tradition makes ghost weddings look tame. Lingqi, death by 1,000 cuts. Imagine being sentenced to die not with one blow, but with hundreds of tiny cuts, each designed to prolong your agony. That was Lingqi, one of ancient China's most terrifying punishments. Also known as death by 1,000 cuts, Lingqi was used for the worst crimes: treason, patricide, or serious betrayal. It wasn't just about execution. It was about complete humiliation and fear. The condemned was tied to a wooden frame. Then, slice by slice, their flesh was cut away. Sometimes the process went on for hours. Executioners were trained to keep the victim alive as long as possible, cutting carefully to avoid vital organs until the end. But this wasn't just physical punishment. In Chinese belief, the body needed to remain whole in death to reach the afterlife. Lingqi shattered that. It was punishment in this life and the next. Families of the condemned were sometimes punished too, stripped of status or even killed. It was a message to everyone. Loyalty was everything. The practice was outlawed in the early 1900s, but for centuries, it was a symbol of ultimate cruelty. If ghost marriages unsettled you, lynching will haunt you. And yet some practices were even stranger, and just as disturbing. Baby towers, abandoned infant towers. Hidden on the edges of towns, these stone towers held a heartbreaking purpose. They were called baby towers, and they were where unwanted infants, mostly girls, were abandoned to die. In ancient China, boys were seen as a blessing. They carried the family name, worked the land, and cared for parents in old age. Girls, on the other hand, were often viewed as a financial burden. This cruel imbalance led to one of the darkest customs in history. Families who couldn't afford to raise a daughter or didn't want one would leave her in a baby tower. These towers were small, windowless structures built specifically for this act. There was no caretaker, no help, just silence. It wasn't considered murder. In some areas, it was viewed as letting fate decide, but fate rarely intervened. What's even more disturbing, these towers were once common. People walked by them daily. Some saw them as necessary, even righteous. This wasn't just about poverty. It was about a culture so deep-rooted in gender preference that it erased countless lives before they even began. And yet, in the same society that abandoned girls, some men gave up everything to serve the emperor, in the most painful way imaginable. Eunuchs and castration, from punishment to power. In the imperial court of ancient China, some of the most powerful men were not really men at all. They were eunuchs, castrated servants who held immense influence behind palace walls. Castration was often forced, sometimes chosen. Boys from poor families were mutilated and sent to the Forbidden City, hoping for a better future. The surgery was brutal and often fatal. Everything was removed. No anesthetic, no dignity. But those who survived could rise fast. Eunuchs ran the palace. They were gatekeepers to the emperor, keepers of secrets, and sometimes even political kingmakers. Some manipulated royal decisions. Others grew richer than nobles. Why trust them? Because they couldn't have families of their own. No sons, no legacy. In theory, that meant loyalty to the throne and no personal agenda. In reality, many became ruthless, playing the palace like a chessboard. Being a eunuch meant giving up your manhood, sometimes willingly, for a chance at power. A twisted trade-off of pain for influence. And yet, even outside the palace, the daily lives of ordinary people held their own bizarre secrets, like using human waste to stay fresh. Urine as deodorant, hygiene in ancient times. Before perfume shops and body sprays, some ancient Chinese had a very different way to fight body odor. They used urine. Human urine was believed to have cleansing properties. It was sometimes mixed with herbs and applied under the arms or used to wash clothes. In certain texts, it was even suggested as a way to soften the skin. Why urine? The ammonia content made it an effective cleaning agent, even if it smelled awful. Back then, science wasn't separating sanitation from superstition. What mattered was what worked, or seemed to. It wasn't just for peasants either. Records show that even within wealthier homes, this odd remedy made its rounds. Hygiene wasn't about smelling nice. It was about keeping away disease, spirits, or shame. Unbelievable? Yes. But that's the theme of ancient life, doing the best with what you had, even if it was downright disgusting. Ready for something less smelly, but just as shocking? Hanging coffins, cliffside burials, high above rivers and forests, nailed into vertical cliff faces, rest ancient wooden coffins. No ladders, no scaffolding, just boxes hanging hundreds of feet in the air. This was how some people honored their dead. The hanging coffins belonged mainly to the Bo people, an ethnic group in southern China. Their belief that raising the dead closer to the heavens brought peace to the spirit and protected the living from misfortune. How they placed these coffins remains a mystery. Some say they carved footholds into rock. Others believe they used ropes and scaffolding. Either way, it took immense effort and risk. Many coffins have lasted for centuries, untouched by animals and floods. A perfect resting place, if you ignore the dizzying height. To the Bo, these were sacred sky burials. To us, it's a jaw-dropping example of devotion. But even more mysterious are the bones that whispered answers, before ink ever did. Oracle bones, divination via ox and turtle shells. Long before paper, ancient Chinese kings asked questions to the gods using bones, literally. Oracle bones were made from ox shoulder blades or turtle shells. Priests would carve questions into the bone, like, "Will the harvest be good?" or "Should we go to war?" Then they'd heat it until it cracked. The shape of the cracks revealed the answer. This wasn't a game. These readings guided massive decisions. Rulers believed the spirit spoke through bone and fire, and once the reading was done, the bones were stored, becoming some of the earliest examples of Chinese writing. Thousands have been found, offering a window into the minds of people from 3,000 years ago. What they feared, what they hoped for, what they believed. It was magic, science, and record-keeping all in one. And while bones were used to predict fate in battle, some turned juggling into a weapon. Juggling warriors, Zhang Yiliu's tactical performance. Picture this, a battlefield, warriors clashing, and one man steps forward juggling 9 balls with flawless control. His name was Zhang Yiliu, and according to legend, he didn't need a sword. His juggling alone was enough to win battles. In the spring and autumn period of China's history, Zhang Yiliu used this unusual skill to distract enemy soldiers. They were so stunned, so mesmerized by the display, they froze. His side seized the moment and launched a successful attack. This wasn't just a fluke. In ancient times, showmanship and psychology played a role in warfare. Confusing or distracting your enemy could be as powerful as brute force. Zhang became a symbol of unorthodox strategy. His legacy proves that sometimes thinking outside the box, way outside, could turn the tide of war. But in the fight against disease, ancient China turned to something risky and remarkably ahead of its time. Variolation. Early vaccine practices. Centuries before modern medicine, ancient China took a dangerous leap in the fight against smallpox. They called it variolation, and it might have saved millions. Doctors would take dried scabs from someone infected with smallpox, grind them into powder, and blow it up the nose of a healthy person, or sometimes rub it into a small cut. The hope? The patient would get a mild case and then become immune. Yes, it was risky. Some died, but many lived. And for the time, it was groundbreaking. This method appeared as early as the 10th century, long before Western science caught up. China's bold experiment laid the groundwork for vaccination as we know it. It was a mix of desperation, ingenuity, and incredible risk. But it worked, and that's what mattered. So after diving into ghost weddings, cliff coffins, and perfume made from pee, what does it all mean? Let's wrap this up. And final hook. Ancient China was a civilization of breathtaking innovation and unsettling extremes. They healed with scabs, punished with blades, married the dead, and balanced life on the edge of cliffs. To us, it all sounds bizarre, even brutal. But to them, it was normal. It was culture. It was survival. These weren't just random quirks. They were shaped by belief, fear, power, and deep respect for ancestors and tradition. And while some customs have vanished, others still echo in quiet corners of modern life. What's truly weird? How much we recognize in their strangeness, our own fears, hopes, and need for meaning. Strip away the centuries, and you find people trying to make sense of the world just like we do. So next time you spray deodorant or scroll through wedding photos, remember, history is full of stories stranger than fiction. And these were just a few of the weird things they did in ancient China.